Folks, basically this has been a fairly successful trip by Prime Minister Modi, whether it was to the White House, whether it was the Quad and the UNGA. But because of domestic politics, it's kind of getting roiled in a storm in a teacup, and it's going around the fact that there's one whole bunch of guys who obviously want to puncture his feel good factor. Is a bunch of guys who are obviously left leaning, Congress, Samajwadi Party, who are essentially talking about does Biden and Kamala Harris trust Modi, especially after Ab Ki Baar, Trump Sarkar stuff in Houston. But let me point this out to these guys, right? The United States stayed the course with Pakistan despite losing soldiers, despite being let down for 20 years. 20 years, folks. It ain't gonna be sidelined by some howdy Trump issue, because they are focused on their principal objective, geostrategic objective, which is China. And fortunately for India, without India, that whole process for the United States, they know it, Australia knows it, is not going to have a successful end, folks. So second thing that you see is there's a lot of talk about, hey, while Trump's off, Modi, there's a declining graph of Modi globally because Biden didn't see off or receive Modi at the White House. But let me say, here's protocol, right? President is head of state, Modi is not head of state. So my own thought process would be that neither Scott Morrison nor Boris Johnson will be received or I could be wrong, or sent off by Biden, because neither of them are heads of state. In our case, the head of state continues to be the president. So this is protocol. Biden is known to follow protocol to the T. So this is again a storm in the teacup. Right? Global reputation, well, Biden's global reputation has been trashed after Afghanistan too. Hey, so Modi's reputation as a democratic credential is not currently flying that high. We all admit that. Internally, I hope for a change in terms of domestic policy. But you can't mix those up with global policies, because you'll end up hurting India just like the BJP did with Manmohan Singh. Manmohan Singh probably signed the best deal for India, which was the nuclear deal. And it almost got ruptured by the BJP and the left by trying to scupper it. That survived. However, BJP, this includes current Prime Minister Modi and Advani, kind of put shackles around it by the liability clause, by insurance clause, and we are still suffering from that. So let's just say both parties, which is the Congress or the BJP, are culpable in this process. But we're going to go beyond that, right? Quad, a reverse string of pearls. How is India countering China in the Indian Ocean? That's important. Myanmar has received its first submarine from India. China is maritime aggression. India has been a border standoff with China and Ladakh region since early May, but thousands of miles away in Indian Ocean region, there is a potential of another showdown against Asian giants. He says Indian Navy claims to have a dominant position in the region despite Chinese naval build-up due to the Straits of Malacca, which connects the South China Sea to the Indian Ocean and is 200 kilometers from the South Andaman Islands. The Indian Navy warships, fighter jets and spy planes are deployed along critical sea lanes of communication and choke points. That's the important point to remember. Meanwhile, India has accelerated the ventures in Mauritius. Not only in Mauritius, there is another side play that we are beginning to patrol the seas in Madagascar. Quad an option. India's Himalayan conflict with China has resulted in the US, Australia and Japan offering its open support in countering Beijing. This is what was going. And when people were talking about this stuff, this is a point that people should note. Going by seniority, of the four heads of governments of the Quad nations, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been in office longer than US President Joe Biden, Australia PM Scott Morrison, and Japanese PM Yoshihide Suga. The seniority was kept in mind during the summit, where Modi was the last to arrive and the first to leave the venue. That's the important part, right? And here's another thing, right? As India's Quad and value of coalitions, as C. Raja Mohan, right? He says, unlike communist China, a democratic India can't be brutally transactional about its external partnership, but Delhi could certainly learn from Beijing in not letting the theological debates about alliances cloud its judgment about the extraordinary economic and security challenges India confronts today. The infructuous obsession with non-alignment diverts Delhi's policy attention away from the urgent task of rapidly expanding India's national capabilities in partnership with like-minded partners. And that, folks, is the important part right now. Cheers. It's amazing how as early as October 2020, we were still debating whether, after the changeover, whether it was with the Quad, as in Rani Bakhcha writes, a different template is setting in. The core of Quad is a security defense grouping. There is a nod to ASEAN centrality, but the Quad has moved well beyond that. ASEAN can now be accommodated in the Quad Plus formation. The Quad Plus is smartly conceived. The first Quad Plus included South Korea, Vietnam and New Zealand, worked well to tackle the myriad issues surrounding the pandemic, supply chains, restarting economic, etc. The second Quad Plus includes Israel and Brazil and concentrated on healthcare technologies, vaccines, etc. That's the important part. So then you had Nayas Chanda, right, blowing hot and cold. Despite two ministerial meetings, the Quad still remains only an aspirational body. And see how far we've come. India's hesitancy has fueled doubts about the body and therefore amplified the risk India incurs from membership. Both supporters and critics tend to view the Quad as an incipient military alliance. Critics fear India will lose its wanted strategic autonomy by joining what appears to be an anti-China alliance. I think, it's just fast-moving world, right? And then what did Casey Singh write? A US embrace deepens, watch for pitfalls ahead. Yeah, but I guess we have grown up to know. See that? He says M.K. Rastogra, a former foreign secretary and doyen of Indian diplomacy, now in his late 90s, like Henry Kissinger, recently wrote that the US needs to devise a concessional buy-lease program for India to boost quickly its defense capability to deter China. And here I think India really needs to put its hands out. Then you have the challenge of walking the Indo-Pacific talk and countering China. India must note the strategic talk alone cannot trump overriding economic reality. Show for that. The Indo-Pacific journey, as Harshvardhan Shringla wrote, he says, whatever the navigational map, the fact that the Indo-Pacific is the 21st century's locus of political and security concerns and competition, of growth and development, and of technology incubation and innovation is indisputable. And then this is the important part. Out of the closet, says Indrani Bakshi, and she writes about out of the closet with Becca. He says, this week, the two countries signed off on Book 1 of the journey when India signed the BECA, the last of the foundational agreements which seals defense interoperability between the two sides and brings us all out of the closet. The fact that India managed to close the deal with the US a week before the election, another president, is significant and in and of itself. For those hyperventilating about doing it in the dying days of the Trump administration, they fail to read the moment. India has had a good run with President Donald Trump, and it was important to rank up this foreign policy achievement for both sides. At a time of tense standoffs with China, a well-oiled India-US interoperability is critical, and we've got that right. And then you have Harsh Pant, the real anchor of Indo-Pacific plan. He says India's position made others buy into the idea and incorporate it in their security outlook. So India played a huge role as China galvanizes its diplomacy to manage the negative externalities emerging out of this Indo-Pacific vision, which despite Beijing's best efforts is going from strength to strength. The challenge for India is to sustain the momentum of showcasing the Indo-Pacific vision and its operational realities. And I think this has just gone from strength to strength. I know there are a lot of naysayers and you love to hate, hate to love to love Modi. The point of this matter is this foreign policy achievement really has to be magnified. It has been an achievement. Cheers. So you had a very interesting readout from Rajiv Bhatia, Democratic Quad versus China's Quad. He said, even as the Sherpas of the Quad democracies, the US, India, Japan, Australia, prepare for a summit of the top leaders in Washington later this year, a rival quadrilateral grouping led by the principal challenger China is in the making with Russia, Pakistan and Iran, called BRIC. Fired by the hubris of the successful centenary of the Communist Party of China, Beijing has been plotting its next moves on the geopolitical chessboard, and countering Quad is one of them. Is there a credible threat to the Democratic Quad? Understanding China's coalescence with each of these actors is going to be instructive. He says, These three relationships are vibrant, but they are also vulnerable. The Putin-Joe Biden summit in Geneva showed that Putin is willing to improve relations with the US if these red lines are respected. Iran continues to be interested in the JCPO Jacopa. If it's materialized, that will increase US leverage. Steady friend Pakistan is unpredictable, but the army, the most powerful player, remains interested in measured normalization with New Delhi. And then he says the Quad of democracies should strengthen itself and their Sherpas should watch China's moves carefully. And when we say that, let's take a look at what Pramit Pal Chaudhary has to write about the Quad meeting from the US. The rise of a genuine counterweight to China. He says as the Donald Trump administration was preparing to demit office, US Secretary Mike Pompeo was congratulated by a staffer for reviving Quad. He reportedly laughed and said, and 80% of this was thanks to China. Xi Jinping should be declared the founder of Quad. Quad has completed a remarkable gestation in the past 9 months. The latest summit makes diplomacy almost geeky in the amount of tech involved. AI, space, cybersecurity, resilient infrastructure, STEM education, the Internet of Things, semiconductors, biotechnology, clean hydrogen, and more that have been placed on the table and actified. Most important is that it reflects an establishment consensus among the 4 members. The US's response to China today is a mix of shrapnel and silicon. On the military side, it has anchored the Western Pacific with 2 hardened triangles. It has crafted a joint US-Japan commitment to defend Taiwan at one end and a nuclear naval agreement down under at the other end. In between, it has renewed its visiting force agreement, stabilizing its relationship with the Philippines. You've got to hear all this, right? Quad's priority will be about showing that rule-based democracies are more than capable of doing the same. As a senior advisor of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe explained, Quad is deliberately designed to be flexible. It does not require a consensus amongst its members to act. Then he says, from Seoul and Tokyo, by agreement, security arrangements are kept at arm's length. Security is done at a bilateral level, and even the Malabar naval exercises are kept separate. The recent Australia-centered nuclear submarine deal was a perfect fit. It enhanced security, but outside the Quad. It is not about fooling China. This is more about reassuring skittish governments in place such as Southeast Asia. China is the only anti-Quad Asian country. But there are a lot of Quad skeptic countries and we need to reassure them, says Indian official. The latest Quad statement was almost flowery when it underscored our dedication towards working with ASEAN and its member states. Important. A semiconductor network must include the likes of Taiwan, South Korea, and Singapore. Vaccines will be rejected if that does not, if the doses are contaminated with toxic geopolitics. A genuine Chinese counterweight is developing rapidly. India currently lacks the diplomatic and economic capability to balance against China across Asia. Quad accepts that accelerating the rise of India is part of the implicit geopolitical agenda of the organization. The Quad's principles on technology, design, development, governance, and use have potential to be more world-defining than the RCEP. But what we are now serving is the construction part of the story. 4 of the 5 eyes now share a nuclear technology muscle, and Quad has now left the runway and is reaching cruising altitude, folks. That's the important readout. Cheers. Now the quick headlines coming out of the United States. PM flags COVID origin, ease of doing business, ranking row at UN. Modi's remarks are unlikely to go unnoticed in Beijing. Come make in India, Modi woos global vaccine manufacturer. This is like a big one, folks. He's the only one who has had the gazungas to take on China there. Eye on China, Quad vows to up its game in Indo-Pacific, says Chidanand Rajghatta. Unwavering US commitment for key defense ally India. This is again Chidanand Rajghatta. A message for Pakistan as Biden, Modi denounce use of terrorist proxies. PM suggests 6 T's as pillars of transformation Indo-US relationships. The time for India has come. Quad nations agree to redouble efforts for Indo-Pacific stability. Nations backing terror must know it'll hurt them too, says PM. Yashwantraj writes. Biden supports permanent seat for India at UN Security Council. India slams Pakistan use of terror as state policy as Imran brings up Kashmir at UNGA. Pakistan hits out at America at UN over fallout of its war on terror. Pakistan is an arsonist in firefighters' guise. India hits out at Imran. This is too funny. Using terror as political tool, dangerous. PM slams Pakistan, also takes dig at China during UNGA's speech, writes Sachin Prasha. And then you have Indian diplomat gives fiery speech to Imran's case speech, right? That's really interesting. And this is a thing that, happened in the background. Huawei hears back in China after swapping deal. But the point of the matter is this going to improve the relationship? In my opinion, absolutely not. Huawei has been nailed and is going to continue to be nailed, folks, to the advantage of India. Jai Hind.